All right, we are back with Creativity is the Cure. I am your host, Malcolm Moore, and today I have my good friend, Mark Daley. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Mark is an author, social activist, and entrepreneur. And first, I've got to get out of the way how we know each other. I am lucky enough that I know Mark and his husband, Jason, and I have all three of their kids at school. For how many years has it been? 2 or 3 years?
More than that, I think. Amy's in 6th, so yeah.
Yeah, they're all so different and so fun. And also, I just wanted to thank you. 2 years ago, I did my own kids show with Henson Puppeteers, and you guys supported me, so thank you so much. I remember that.
Oh, we're happy to.
We also have a connection. I moved here to California in 2013, and when I was in Rochester, New York, my hometown, I worked at a place called Hillside Children's Center. Have you heard of them at all?
I have.
So what we would do, I mean, they offer all kinds of services, but it was on top of a hill, and we would take children out of violent situations, homes where things weren't going well. And then the basic idea is we would have them for 9 months to help rehabilitate them and then find them foster homes. And I think you have a connection with that type of thing.
I definitely do.
Could we start off by saying, what's your professional background?
Sure. Well, I spent the first, decade plus of my career working in politics. I worked as a press secretary for a bunch of different members of Congress, governors and senators and candidates for president. And then I started doing mostly online advertising marketing work. And now I work with child welfare agencies and work with them on their marketing or advertising around foster parent recruitment work.
So a lot of PR and being spokesmen for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how did you get into that type of work?
Sort of a wrong door, right time. It was great when I was finishing college. I kind of finished a semester early, and my advisor said to me, "Hey, we have this internship program in DC. If you want it, it's yours." And so I moved down to DC to work for my local congressman, and then got hired on.
Wow.
And so I just started on the Hill at 21 years old.
What was that kind of a culture shock for you?
It was amazing, though, because I went from, suburban Boston, where I was in college and where I had grown up, and then I'm in D.C., where at the time I think the average age of an employee on Capitol Hill was like 27.
Oh, wow.
Okay. It's still fairly young. I mean, because also they paid you no money, and it was really, right. No one else could afford to live there.
Got to pay your dues. Right.
Exactly. So I loved it. You're around a whole bunch of people who cared about the world,
Yeah. I've been there only once. I remember it is very cold in the winter.
Yeah, I was from Boston, so it was a heat wave for me.
Yeah, I've been to Boston once, Mass Ave, right?
That's right.
A really good music town, from what I remember.
Definitely.
One of the big things I want to talk about today is your new book, Safe, a memoir of fatherhood, foster care, and the risks we take for family. What led you to want to write this book?
At first, anger.
Yeah.
And as we talk about it, the book really chronicles the story of how Jason and I became parents.
Right.
And so what it tells the story of is we've decided to foster. And so we had taken in 2 young boys who were 3 months old and 13 months old. They were brothers. And we had them for about a year and a half before they ended up reunifying with their biological parents, which is the goal of foster care. And
I was going to ask that. So was that your initial goal, just to temporarily help somebody?
No. Our goal was definitely to adopt.
Right.
And truthfully, that's not the reason you should get into foster care.
Right.
But as a gay couple, obviously your options are limited.
Right.
And so we had looked into surrogacy, we looked into private adoption. I have some cousins who entered our family through foster care, and so it felt like that was the way that I wanted to do it. And so as we started the journey, we realized they really impressed upon us that reunification is always the goal. But we thought, 55% of kids reunify, but the other 45 don't.
Right.
So what does that mean? And, how can we see that we can make sure that we try to get kids that aren't going to go home? And when they call you one day and say, here's the scenario, you want to say yes or no, you weigh in all these different questions and make a decision, because they need to move on to somebody else.
Right. Right.
And so when they asked us, we asked a whole list of questions, and the answers seemed like they weren't going to go home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, as a gay couple trying to adopt kids, are your chances better than other states?
Well, California definitely allows it. There's a lot of states where it's not necessarily outlawed, but it's not what they're focusing on.
Right.
There's
chances are not as good.
Yeah, exactly. You're definitely California. They see 2 same-sex people coming in. They know that, there's no such thing as an unplanned pregnancy in our world. Like, we're there to have kids and raise kids.
That's actually a great point.
Yeah. It's a very thoughtful decision.
Yeah. And by the way, I did absolutely love your book. I'm a voracious reader. And what I liked right away, it was very engaging and great momentum. It moves very quickly. It's one of those books I didn't want to put down. At times it's heartbreaking, but times it's really funny. Fluorescent light bulbs, they should be outlawed. I'm a teacher, and a lot of us can't stand those lights. And so we bring in lamps for home, and we put diffusers in there because it's just garish and...
Totally. I was talking about a county office space for the probation department, and man, it was just, you spend a lot of time in government buildings,
And the noise they make,
Exactly.
They should be outlawed, I agree. So how's the response been to your book? How long has it been out now? About a year?
It'll be a year in January. So it's been great so far. We're, it's chugging along. It's a lot of fun. I think for me, the most exciting part is, when I get an email from a stranger or someone on Instagram who sends me a message. It's just like, hey, here's my story. Right. I didn't have the words for the way I felt until I read your book, and just thank you. Like that, it means a lot to me to have been able to do that for other people.
And for them to know that someone else has gone through this, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I do want to clarify for your listeners too, like, obviously we were in a situation where we wanted to adopt the two boys that we had,
right,
and who ultimately did reunify. And it was a situation where we just felt like if they were to go back, they weren't going back to an environment where they were safe.
Right. And that's what helped you decide on the title.
Exactly.
I don't want to have any plot spoilers, and you've kind of already talked about that. I mean, you temporarily, they're out there. You temporarily had two children, and then they had to go back with their parents, and now you have three.
Yes.
So my question is, does the hardship you experience losing the first two kids help you appreciate the current three?
I definitely think so. I would definitely agree with that. I think that every relationship you have in your life is different, though. And I think that that's what's interesting about it. It's like Amy, Eddie, and Josh, our three kids, are so much different than the boys that we had. And we also had them at different ages. Amy, Eddie, and Josh were 2, 5, and 6 when they came to live with us, and the boys were 3 months and 13 months. So it's just a really different experience with each of them.
When I worked at Hillside Children's Center in Rochester, New York, it was a tough job for me because I wanted the kids to do well. We only had 9 months, but things don't always work as smoothly as you'd expect or hope for, right? What I saw a lot that shocked me at first is we would get a kid in, he'd start to do better, we'd build relationships, we felt that he was ready to find a new home. We would find a new home. The parents were great, everything was great, but then they would act up on purpose to get kicked out of the house and come back to our organization because that's what they're used to. Can you relate to that at all? Have you seen that in your work with finding foster homes?
Absolutely. I do a lot of work with kids who are on probation. And a kid who's on probation usually is a kid who has grown up in and out of the foster care system.
Yes, exactly. That's the type.
They've been failed by every institution that's touched them, as far as the child welfare agencies and everything, and bounce from home to home to home before ultimately they get picked up for some sort of crime. And sometimes maybe that's even just getting in a fight with another kid at a group home facility. That's a crime when it's not a sibling. It's just... So I think for us, oftentimes what we see is, a kid gets into a situation and everything's going well and they start to self-sabotage. I think sometimes it's just to test, to say, like, will you still love me if I do this? Right.
Now, I've seen that. Yeah, they're testing the love. But I was more curious of those kids that, even kids outside of foster homes, a lot of people that are in abusive situations.
Yeah.
You ask, why don't they leave? Because a healthy situation is foreign.
Right.
To them, and they have this bizarre, maybe unconscious sense of comfort being in a situation they know, even if it's not good.
Yeah.
So do you have any hope or any ideas or any advice on how we could help those type of kids?
I think it's
get out of that loop, right?
Yeah. Honestly, it's consistency, right? It's just being there and having the same reaction every time, and continuously showing
continuity.
Support. Yeah, and just if you do this, this is the consequence, but it doesn't impact my love. And that's, the bigger thing.
Right?
It's hard. It
is.
So hard.
And I saw that in your book, and I've listened to some other podcasts, and there's no easy answers for any of this other than we must keep trying. And
it's funny. It's like every kid in foster care, their situation is different, right? Every kid, every social worker, every biological parent, every foster parent, every group home counselor, So every experience is so different, and the outcomes, especially for these teenagers, like imagine you get taken from your family, you go to live in a group home facility, or you go to live with a foster family, and they're saying to you, like, we don't know when you're going back, if you're ever going back.
Right.
Like, well, how do you plan, like, oh, well, when, I mean, I remember having dreams of like, oh, when I get my license, I'm going to be able to do this, or I'm going to. Right. These kids can't do that.
They don't have that.
Advanced planning.
And then the other extreme I've seen, and this is terrible to think about, but a lot of the kids that were brought out of those situations maybe didn't realize how bad the situation they were. So they get in here, and it was almost like an apartment complex. Yeah. We would have this center thing, and then a wing that was all boys, a wing that was all girls.
Yeah.
And a lot of those kids, because they're teenagers and their brain and their body is going crazy, they want to escape. They have no plan where they want to escape to. They just want to get out of there, right?
Right.
And the sad thing is, I remember a lot of the young girls, they knew the only way they could get out is to get pregnant. Oh. So we would see things like that, and it's sad for me. The last time I worked there was 2012. Sometimes these kids, after they get out, they reach out to me on Facebook and they say, oh, I have 4 kids now. And I'm going, you're 19.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking. I just wanted everybody to know it's such a complicated situation. And another thing, my employees and coworkers and I, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
You go in there, you want to do the right thing for the right reason, but it's mentally and physically exhausting.
I always felt so bad. In the book I talk about our social workers, and there was one that we had that we were really unhappy with, and I don't sugarcoat that at all in the book. But there, we have this one social worker, and there's a situation where, the older child is, maybe a year and a half old, and he trips and falls in the backyard, and he hits his head, and we take him to the emergency room, and of course we're calling her, we're texting her, we're emailing her, we're filing this incident report and everything. And it was like a Friday night or something, and she doesn't respond. And finally on like Monday I hear from her, and of course in my head I'm like, what's wrong with her? I can't believe it took this long to find, I have this like chip on my shoulder. Yeah. When she calls, she said, Mark, I have 45 active cases. She wasn't being defensive at all. When she said that, she was just like, I have, 45 open cases right now.
Overworked.
And when I leave your house, I don't worry about you both making the right decision. Like, you guys, those kids are fine. I'm not worried about their safety or the way that you take care of them.
Right.
She said, but, I don't have that luxury with all of my cases. And so I didn't think twice about it. And then she slipped in, oh yeah, and I was also chasing 2 kids down to Tijuana on an Amber Alert. I was like, well, your priorities were in the right place.
And I saw that too. We would have kids that would figure out how to escape. And there's a couple times I'm running down the streets of Rochester trying to call the police and trying to catch the kid just to make sure they're safe and get them back.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think the general public understands how hard it is to do those jobs. Everybody from every level in these organizations. And the people that are still there are just stellar.
I know. I also think too, and even that, like when a kid goes to a facility like that, though, it's like, they have the counselor that they bond with, and then that person leaves, or even just goes home at night.
Right.
It's like, it's like that home environment is what's missing for them.
Yes.
But sometimes a kid needs to be in those facilities before they go into home, just because they need to stabilize.
True.
There's so much going on in their life.
And I think that's a big part of the process, to get them out of that negative environment.
Yeah.
Help get them ready. And I remember there was a lot of fun things too. Like I would get the van and take kids to movies and, go around, go to a baseball game, go to the zoo. So you're right.
And
like,
kids are fun.
Giving them a good experience that they don't forget. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, when they're teenagers, who knows what's going to happen?
Exactly.
And also, we were talking about this earlier, but I spent a lot of my life being a behaviorist and doing all kinds of jobs. I work with special needs populations from infants up to people that are 65. And one thing I see that is really heartbreaking is when the parents of these kids going through difficult situations abandon or take advantage of the children. I know of some cases where the parents wouldn't let go of the legal attachments to the kids because they wanted to get the state money in, and they weren't helping them, and they were taking advantage of them. Or even worse, like I was saying earlier, when I would have kids that were, and this is not at Hillside, this is a different agency, blind and deaf, kids that have to be fed through their stomach with a tube. Yeah. A lot of times the parents just can't take it, and they will abandon them. Sometimes I saw them dropped off at hospitals, just don't want to take care of them anymore. Or the the inevitable for all these kids. Someday the parents are not going to be around. They're going to die.
Right.
And how can we give these kids the skills of independence so they'll be okay if they don't have parents or if their parents are gone?
Yeah, the biological parent side of it was such an interesting thing for us because, when you go into this idea that you're going to foster adopt, you think like, oh, I'm going to get the baby that was abandoned at the hospital, and this baby's, going to need a family, and here we are.
So you're saying, right? You made a scenario in your head before you went.
Totally. Well, and it was a scenario that I've heard a dozen times from other people. So,
and it comes from a good place.
Exactly, right? And then all of a sudden you realize like that's not the case. It's that there's this family that has gone through some unimaginable things that are just unfathomable to me in my privileged world that I come from and the lifestyle that I've become accustomed to. And then you see that and you see them as a victim, but then you also understand that their children have also been perpetrated against.
Absolutely.
And so there is that conflict of like one person can be a victim and a perpetrator at the same time.
Yes.
But that doesn't make them bad people, and it doesn't mean they don't love their children.
I think they fall into these patterns naturally.
Yeah, or that they're incapable of caring for their kids. It's just, I wish we as a society did a better job on the front end of how do we make sure that people who decide to have children have the right supports around them.
Right, and let's think about it. Who knows what you and I could deal with if we had an extreme situation beyond what we can imagine.
Right.
And I don't fault these people for abandoning or giving up, but I do fault the system for not having, something to fall back on to help those kids. The fact that, I remember being in my early 20s and going, I was like, what happened to this kid? Oh, the parents didn't want to take him anymore. They're at this hospital. So I went to the hospital because I built a relationship with a kid, and there were 20 kids.
Wow.
And kids that are 12 lying in a bed alone. And I just burst into tears. I couldn't believe that was the situation. So do you have any ideas how we could make a system for a parent that's just burnt out and have a plan, or have you heard of anything? first of all, I don't know the answer to this, right? Yeah. I mean, honestly, this is, I say that all the time with this book. When I got the idea to write the book, I went to my lit agent and said, I want to write this book on, how do we fix foster care? And she's like, how do you know that? I was like, oh, you're right, I don't. So, but I'm going to write the book and I have the answer.
It's no idea.
Right.
But I think that the biggest thing is what you find over and over again is families that enter the system tend to don't have a lot of support around them.
Yes.
And so when there's other responsible, caring adults, whether they're family or not, involved in their lives, those children are less likely to enter care. Right. Those parents are less likely to be able to handle whatever's thrown at them. There's also, we need to do a better job of helping families when it comes to addiction and mental health issues.
Absolutely.
Get the support they need. A lot of parents are afraid to get help for addiction because they're afraid they're going to lose their kids if they go to rehab. Or
a stigma. I mean, I've seen it in all my years teaching in organizations that the parents, I can't tell you how many times I said, why does this kid have an IEP? He doesn't need one. Or why doesn't that kid have one? And a lot of times they don't have one because the parents don't want the stigma being attached to my child, or I don't need therapy. It's a bad thing,
You also wonder too, I mean, I think there's just a lot of people that don't know what is available to them.
Yes.
And don't know who to ask or how to ask. Or naturally too, I think, as a white man, honestly, like I didn't have a problem picking up the phone and calling the government for something.
Right.
But I also don't have the history that an indigenous family has, or with the government interfering in my life, or a black family with the government interfering.
And you also did things you worked in connection with the government before.
Totally. But there's no historic oppression of white men.
Right.
So there's not in that sense where I would be much more keen to opening the door if someone from the government was here saying, hey, we understand your family is going through something, we want to help you. Yeah. It would be easier for me than someone else to be trusting. And I think that's justifiable.
Right.
For them to have that natural fear. But I wish that fear didn't exist, and that there were more we could do on a community level, just, neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, cousin to cousin.
It sounds like it's going to take everybody to work together to make this.
I think so.
Make this happen. All right. Well, the crux of my podcast is really about creativity. And as I was explaining earlier, This is about how you use the creative part of your brain to solve issues in your life or deal with challenging things. So like you're a writer, I'm a drummer. As a drummer, I might be playing a drum solo and I have to, suddenly it's a solo. I got to think of something on the top of my head with no planning at all. And maybe with you, that's writer's block or things like that, right? What is your first memory of being creative? What was the first time that you discovered you could come up with something really fun out of thin air that you did not expect out of yourself?
I don't think I knew that my mom tells the story of my dad had a little workshop in the backyard. I mean, it was a shed. It wasn't a workshop, but I'll give him that and call it a workshop. And I would go outside and like take hammers and nails and just like build forts in the backyard. And we had this fort that just kept growing. If they were going to throw away an old piece of carpet, it was like going in the fort, and it just got bigger and bigger.
Wow.
And my mom would always just like look out the window and be like, God, what a monstrosity that is. But he's creative, so I'm going to let him just keep going, Don't hurt yourself with the hammer, kid.
Wow. That is really cool. Do you think that you inherited any creative aspects from your mom or your dad?
Oh, I think from both in different ways. I think my dad's definitely an artist, even though he doesn't he doesn't really practice much. But,
what kind of art?
He could draw, he was an amazing artist when he was drawing and stuff like that. But, and he also can tell a great story. He's really good at that,
Storytelling is the most important part of art. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, the creativity is a cure. When I think about that, I will say that sitting down to write this book was, and this is the only book I've ever written, so it was by far the most therapeutic thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, I want to ask you that. Now, I love reading books. My favorite type of book is a biography, and yours is pretty close to one. And from the people that I've talked to that have written books, it seems like it is very therapeutic. Oh, yeah. And when they take everything that's jumbled up and scrambled in their head and put it in order, it's like an exorcism, right?
It really, because you're also, you still have to make it interesting. So, if you're telling a story, you might think like, oh, here's the story then. And that was such an experience that was either, drove out some emotion in you, whether that was anger or fear or excitement. Yeah. And you want to put that story in there, but you realize it doesn't really advance the book forward. Right. It's like, and then all of a sudden, as you're reliving whatever that moment is in the book, something else hits you and you're like, oh, right, that's like that time when I was with my cousin and this happened. And, it just flows so naturally for you to find these other things. I wrote, we obviously have 3 kids, and I work full time. So I wrote this book mostly from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m.
I was going to say, when did you?
I would come down and sit in our living room, and there were mornings where you're just sitting there and you're just sobbing. Yeah. And then you're like, all right, get it together because you got to wake up kids and make eggs. Like, that's it.
Put on a happy smile.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can creativity be used to help depression and anxiety? Can the same part of our brain or creative things you like, books, movies, art, any of those things, can they help with mental health struggles?
I mean, look, I am not a psychiatrist, but I would say yes, absolutely. I mean, you think about it, it can be used to numb, right? It can be used to treat, I think.
Or escapism.
Absolutely. I think that's really what it's, for me, it's such an incredible outlet, to be able to distract myself from, anxiety or stress or things I can't control to get into writing.
Who is a creative author that inspires you?
So there's a bunch, but I will say there's my dear friend, Laura Love Hardin, who is actually my lit agent. Okay. She wrote a memoir called The Many Lives of Mama Love, which Oprah picked last year. And it's absolutely phenomenal. Her story's incredible. She was a soccer mom in Santa Cruz who ended up developing a opioid addiction, losing her kids to foster care, going to jail.
Oh my gosh.
And getting her kids back and, writing 7 or maybe 8 now New York Times bestsellers.
Wow.
As a
7 books?
ghostwriter. And then one of them was her book that she actually wrote as well that Oprah picked and
that's incredible.
Oh, she's phenomenal.
I'll have to check that out. Is there a possibility you will write more books in the future?
I would love to. Yeah, I would love to.
I hope so. One thing I like about your writing is I can hear your voice. It sounds like you talking. I don't think that's easy to do.
That's what funny thing is when I was, so much of my writing is for other people. I used to, for years, I wrote speeches for members of Congress, the senators, governors, candidates, whatever. And, you spend so long trying to capture their voice. I remember, in 2004, I worked for Barbara Boxer for a while, and she called me up one day. It was maybe a week on her staff, and she's like, Mark, I love the speech, but you said Evermore. What do you think? I'm Tony Blair? It's like, you're right. You're not. But it's like you try so hard to capture somebody else's voice. So this was the first time I was like, what is my voice? How do I do this? Is
there ever a time you wrote a speech for somebody and they said it the wrong way and your eye is twitching?
Oh,
and
every
you just
time.
have to be quiet.
Oh, every time. Yeah.
I always say it's like if I cut hair, I can't imagine like you did a great haircut for someone, you see them walking down the street the next day and it's a mess, right?
Totally. Well, there are some people, and they're really good, good folks that like, they take what you write and then they tweak it and make it their own.
Right.
And that's where it's awesome.
What are your hopes for your own children?
Oh, man.
I always say to my friends, the biggest thing is I hope they're independent and they can take care of themselves.
Yeah.
How about you? How about you and Jason? What are you guys concerned about the most?
That and that they're safe. I think it's really, that is just, I worry about the state of the world and I think for them, I wish them safety and that they're independent and happy.
Yeah. They're good kids. You guys did a good job.
They're awesome.
How do you and Jason use creativity to solve family issues? You don't have to be specific, but do you ever have to think about what to do in the spur of the moment?
He's way better at this than me, but he also, the guy teaches meditation as well. So he's way better at that, but I'm still a work in progress.
Yeah.
On it. But yeah, no, this is fun. I think our kids are naturally so imaginative.
Yeah.
And, we try very hard to limit screens and all that stuff. So they're not they're not losing it yet.
Yeah.
So it's actually a lot of fun. We do, there's games at dinner or sitting around the table. We'll always play games.
Yeah.
And,
one of the interesting things you did before is you were a communications director and spokesperson for Hillary Clinton during her 2008 presidential campaign. Did your creativity help you endure the stress involved with such a complex task? I can't even imagine how complicated that was.
Yeah, I was one of them. I ran the Iowa press team with her. So I was stationed in Iowa and traveled around with her.
Can you give me an example of something you might do on a regular day?
Just talk to reporters, field all their calls, make sure any call that came in about Iowa was my jurisdiction, or travel with her and stand next to her events. And
were there challenging and difficult times?
Always, yeah. It was such an interesting thing. I was 30 years old, and we're traveling around. She'd do 5-6 stops a day, in small towns.
You're used to the same questions.
Sometimes, and then sometimes you get completely thrown for a loop on it. And it's just it was really. It was such an amazing time. I'm too old to do it now. It's just exhausting. I don't
you
know.
decide to be a parent.
Yeah, exactly. I remember one day we got on the plane after a long day and we were heading back to Des Moines where we were going to spend the night, and she looked at me and she was like, "Mark, you look exhausted. Can I get you a cup of coffee?" And I was like, "How would I get you one? You're 60 years old and I'm 30. You talked to a lot more people than I did today."
You got a little perspective there. I always like to end the interviews with a few quotes and just have people react. So here's the first one. Fred Rogers said this: "Anyone who does anything to help a child in his life is a hero."
I like that. I don't know. I think when I think of that, I think back to my own childhood, but maybe that's because of Fred Rogers. But, you think of the people who really helped shape you and just made an impact.
Yeah.
A lot of
you remember those things.
Them. Absolutely. You never forget them.
This is one of my favorite authors, Henry Nouwen. When we honestly ask ourselves which person in our lives mean the most to us, we often find that it's those who, instead of giving advice, solutions, or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a warm and tender hand. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face with us the reality of our powerlessness. That is a friend who cares.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think about just, for us in particular, when the boys were unified, we worried so much about their safety, and, they ultimately, to spoil some here, but they ultimately did enter back in. Our suspicions were right.
Yeah.
And I just think about, all the friends who were there for us, and really it wasn't, we didn't want to have the conversations about, well, have you heard, what do they do? What's, it was just, we just wanted to be there.
Yeah.
We just wanted everyone to accept that, they were gone and we didn't want to talk about it yet, and sometimes we did want to talk about it. And there were a lot of friends that were there. We're really, really blessed in that department.
So just having them there, right? That's sometimes
Absolutely.
more important.
Yeah. Or not there at certain times. Sometimes you just want to be left alone.
I remember one of the first times I worked as a teacher, I just started at Larchmont. There was a girl in 5th grade. She was distraught, crying, came over to me, and she was like, Mr. Malcolm, I need help. And I said, what's the problem? She went into this whole diatribe, very complicated, crying, yelling, screaming, and I had no idea what to say. In my head, I was like, oh my God, I don't know. But then at the end, she finished, looked at me, smiled, gave me a hug, and said, thank you, Mr. Malcolm.
Anything I can do.
Well, that's kind of like what Henry was saying there.
Yeah.
And, you know, for people that don't know, he's a fascinating guy. He was a gay priest, time where it wasn't okay. And he's also torn between his spirituality and psychology. He had degrees in psychology. He was a well-known priest. And the most fascinating thing is he was at war in his mind with all these things, right? He decided to spend the rest of his life working with special needs kids. He didn't want to talk about anything anymore. He just wanted to sit there and help people that were in need.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely beautiful.
That is. And you think about just people who live with special needs they're always the most present people you're around.
Yes.
And I think that's a gift,
Wear their heart on their sleeves.
Absolutely. And in that moment. That moment is every moment,
Yeah, if we could all learn to just stay there.
Seriously.
The last quote, there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. Nelson Mandela.
This is my, when people are always like, well, what can we do whenever I go out and speak about the book? And the one thing I tell everyone is I was like, look, wherever we go, they're asking us for our vote. They're asking us to donate to their campaign.
Right.
Whatever it is. I'm like, I just want people to start asking their elected officials, the candidates for office, what are you going to do about foster care? Honestly, I don't care what they even say.
Yeah.
I just want them to know that people like us, the voters, we care about this issue.
Yeah.
It's not something you see on a poll. Oh, everyone cares about the economy or reproductive rights. Those things are important too,
golf.
but so are our children. Yeah, exactly.
I won't say anything more than that. I wanted to read an excerpt from your book that I really liked. Page 249, it says, as more time passed, my reaction to grief began to change. The line of emotions that for long had immobilized me under the strength of its claws didn't have the same power over me anymore. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I think it's grief, right? I mean, there's the stages of grief and there's the things we go through, but with distance and time, you start to heal in your own way. I mean, grief is a part of us. It never goes away, but the way that we respond to it changes over time. I think that's really what, or the impact it has on us can change over time.
Right.
Because it's not as present or as real,
We're reassured a little bit as we get older that we'll get through it, and we kind of got to accept all the stages, right?
Absolutely.
One last final really big question for you. As the new presidential administration takeover looms in 2025, do you have any words of wisdom or message of hope at this time of great uncertainty?
Oh, God. I just, this is a time for people to really come together and be there for their neighbors. I think much like 2016, there's a whole group of people that are in a lot of pain that spoke up this election. And, it may cause a lot more pain, and we need to be united and support one another because this is not going to be pretty. I pray that they do the right thing.
I've found it almost impossible to look at the news. It's just devastating. But when I walk around different places and talk to all different kinds of people, and thank God I work in a school that's the most diverse school I've ever seen in my life, I do feel hopeful because one-on-one with people, despite some grievances and things like that, people do seem to care. And even if you get people that live out in the middle of nowhere and may live with the same type of people they are, or you're in the same social media bubble. When I talk to people that we disagree on things, I feel a little more hopeful one-on-one talking to them. There is a way that we can see eye to eye. It reminds me of when I was younger. I used to be a minister, and I was part of this group. One of my dad's good friends, his name was Rusty Olson. He invited me to be in this group, and every week we would go to a different spirituality thing. We'd hang out with Muslims. We'd hang out with Hindus. We'd hang out with Christians. And the big thing we all walked away with is, wow, they do that too?
That's cool.
We all have more similar than we do different. And I just hope people would get off their phones a little bit and just start talking to people. And I think that's
So much of it. It really is. It's frightening that we didn't see the pain that so many people are living with, and the anger and the frustration, because, and to me, the question is, ultimately I'm like, why did they think that this candidate was going to be the one that was going to actually help them? But then we clearly weren't doing a good enough job talking to them and telling them that, hey, we're the ones working for you, but hopefully, we'll be there for one another now. I think you're right. I mean, that's the beauty of America, is its diversity.
Yes.
It's our strength. It's everything.
Doesn't make it easy, but that is the beautiful thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you have any upcoming appearances that you're talking about your book, whether on TV, internet, or in person, a bookstore?
Yeah, I've got a couple coming up. The next one I think is in Orange County. I'm doing the CASA, the Court Appointed Special Advocates. I'm speaking at their holiday fundraiser in a couple weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. And there's a lot of videos on YouTube and podcasts that you've done if people want to find out more.
Yeah, there's a ton.
If people want to find more about you online, they should go to your website, markdaley.us, correct? Yep. And then Instagram, you are MarkDaley00.
Yep.
You do work for some other foundations, right? Should we give their website out?
Sure, I do. I built a site called foster-turned-adoptive, and it's for anyone who's interested in learning more or thinking about becoming a foster parent. They can connect there, and we can connect them with an agency in their community.
Great. So anybody all over the country.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Well, Mark Daley, thank you very much for talking to me today, and I hope we get to talk again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
I appreciate
Thanks, Mark.
it.